Something quiet has been happening beneath the surface of modern romantic life, and most men don't notice it until they've already lost something they can't name. It doesn't announce itself. There's no moment of apparent rupture. Instead, it accumulates in small exchanges, in the way a man begins to edit himself before he speaks, in the pauses that grow longer before he texts back, in the careful calibration of his words to avoid a reaction he's learned to fear. He doesn't realize he's participating in a system where his desires become a liability, where the very act of wanting her has quietly transferred all his leverage into her hands. He thinks he's being patient. He thinks he's being mature. He thinks he's building something. But what he's actually doing is slowly erasing the qualities that made her interested in the first place. You can see it in his posture when he talks about her. There's a heaviness there, a kind of chronic, low-grade anxiety that never fully resolves. He checks his phone more than he used to. He second-guesses his plans. He finds himself explaining his decisions to her in a tone he wouldn't use with anyone else. A tone that carries the faint scent of apology even when he's done nothing wrong. His friends notice he's less available. His work suffers in ways too small to measure, but too consistent to ignore. His gym routine, once sacred, becomes negotiable. He tells himself this is what relationships require, that this is what it means to be considerate, to be evolved, to be different from all those other men who couldn't make it work. But late at night, when he's alone with his thoughts, there's a feeling he can't quite suppress. A sense that he's become smaller, that he's living in a space that doesn't quite belong to him anymore. This isn't about one woman. This isn't even about women in general. This is about a structural transformation in how desire operates in the modern world, and what it quietly does to men who don't understand the game they've entered. Jean Baudrillard spent his life studying simulation, seduction, and the way signs replace reality in late capitalism. He understood something most men today are only beginning to feel, that in a world saturated with images, representations, and endless choice, desire itself becomes a currency that can be manipulated, redirected, and weaponized. The man who reveals his desire too openly, too completely, who makes himself available without friction, without mystery, without the architecture of self-containment, that man doesn't inspire love. He inspires a kind of comfortable contempt, not because she's cruel, but because he's violated the one law that holds power in any exchange. He's made himself too easy to predict, too simple to decode, too willing to sacrifice his frame to preserve hers. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why this keeps happening to you, and what it quietly destroys if you ignore it. Baudrillard came of age in post-war France, watching a world in which images of reality steadily replaced reality itself, and human relationships were becoming indistinguishable from the media representations that framed them. He saw the rise of consumer culture, the explosion of mass media, and the steady hollowing out of authenticity, replaced by simulation. He wrote about seduction not as a romantic ideal, but as a form of power one that operates through absence, through withdrawal, through the refusal to be fully known. In his world, the one who reveals everything loses. The one who maintains distance, who refuses to collapse into transparency, who keeps something in reserve, that person controls the frame. Modern men have been taught the exact opposite. They've been told that emotional availability is strength, that vulnerability is courage, that laying all their cards on the table is honesty. And in theory, in some ideal world, maybe that would work. But the world we actually live in doesn't operate on those principles. It operates on the principles Baudrillard identified: simulation, representation, and the endless deferral of the real. A man who centers his emotional life entirely around a woman, who makes her the primary source of his validation, his purpose, his sense of worth. That man doesn't become more attractive. He becomes a problem to be managed, a weight to be carried, a reflection of everything she's trying to escape in herself. Here's the thesis, and everything that follows will be a variation on this single idea. The moment you allow your desire for her to become the organizing principle of your life, you cease to be the man she desired in the first place. Baudrillard understood this as the fatal strategy of seduction, that showing too much kills the mystery, that availability without resistance collapses attraction, that the one who cares less holds the structural advantage. This isn't cynical. This isn't game playing. This is simply how power moves in systems of desire, and modern men, trained to be open, to communicate, to express their feelings, walk into this dynamic completely unarmed. I work with men who describe the same pattern over and over. They meet a woman. There's genuine chemistry. She's interested. They start spending time together. Everything feels natural. But then slowly, He begins to reorganize his life around her schedule. He cancels plans with friends to be available when she texts. He starts seeking her approval before making decisions that used to be automatic. He monitors her mood, adjusts his tone to avoid conflict, and apologizes for things he doesn't actually believe he did wrong. He thinks he's being considerate. He thinks he's showing her that she matters. But what he's actually doing is telegraphing that she matters more than he does, that his frame is weaker than hers, yet he's willing to negotiate his reality to fit into hers. And the moment she senses that, and she continuously senses it, something shifts. It's not conscious. She doesn't sit down and think, he's lost his center, time to lose respect. It happens at a level beneath language. Her attraction begins to curdle into something else. Comfort maybe, affection possibly, but not desire. Desire, as Baudrillard saw it, requires distance. It requires the space between sign and referent, between image and reality, between what's shown and what's withheld. When you collapse that distance, when you make yourself completely legible, when there's no mystery left to decode, you've ended the game. And the game is everything. Modern women, whether they admit it or not, are swimming in an ocean of male attention. Every swipe, every DM, every interaction is another man revealing his interest, another man making himself available, another man hoping that transparency will win him access. The attention itself is worthless. What matters is the attention of a man who doesn't need to give it, who has other options, who could walk away without his world collapsing. That's the only attention that carries weight. Let's look at how this plays out in real time. A man meets a woman through friends. They go out a few times. The chemistry is undeniable. She's laughing, she's engaged, she's initiating plans. He feels like he's finally met someone who gets him. So he does what he's been taught to do. He leans in. He starts texting her every morning. He asks about her day. He shares his feelings. He tells her how much he enjoys spending time with her. He makes himself available on her schedule. When she cancels plans at the last minute, he says it's fine. He understands they'll reschedule. When she's in a bad mood, he tries to fix it. When she pulls back, he moves closer, asking if everything's okay, trying to reassure her, trying to prove that he's different from all the other men who didn't understand her. Here's what he thinks is happening. He's building trust, showing consistency, demonstrating that he's a safe bet, that he's emotionally mature enough to handle her complexity. Here's what's actually happening. He's erasing every quality that made him enjoyable. He's become predictable. He's become a resource she can access whenever she needs validation, comfort, or attention, but not someone who challenges her, who holds a frame strong enough to contain her chaos, who has a life compelling enough that she has to work to be part of it. Baudrillard would say he's collapsed the symbolic exchange. He's given everything and asked for nothing in return. He's made himself into pure availability, and availability without resistance is worthless. It's the economy of the gift without the return, and in systems of desire, that asymmetry is fatal. Now watch what happens over the next few weeks. Her texts get shorter. She's busier more often. Plans become vague. She's still friendly, still affectionate even, but something fundamental has changed. The sexual tension that was there in the beginning has evaporated. She starts talking about him like a friend. When he tries to escalate physically, she's receptive but unenthusiastic, as if she's doing him a favor. He feels it, of course. He feels the shift, but instead of pulling back, instead of reasserting his own frame, he does the only thing he knows how to do. He tries harder. He plans more elaborate dates. He buys gifts. He writes longer texts. He asks what's wrong. He wants to talk about the relationship. He needs to know where they stand, and with every move he makes, he's confirming what she's already starting to believe, that he needs her more than she needs him, that his life doesn't work without her in it, that he's willing to sacrifice his dignity, his mission, his self-respect just to keep her around. She doesn't despise him for it. She might even feel guilty about how she's starting to feel. But biology doesn't care about guilt. Attraction doesn't respond to effort. And the truth she can't say out loud, the truth that would make her sound cruel if she articulated it, is that she's already starting to scan the environment for someone else. Someone who doesn't text back immediately. Someone who has plans that don't include her. Someone who seems fundamentally unshaken by her presence or absence. Someone, in other words, who still holds the frame Baudrillard described the refusal to be fully known, the maintenance of symbolic distance, the understanding that the one who cares less has the power. I once spoke to a man who described his last relationship in detail. He'd done everything right by modern standards. He communicated his feelings. He was vulnerable. He showed up consistently. He made her the center of his world. And she left him for a man who worked 70 hours a week, forgot her birthday, and barely texted back. He couldn't understand it. He kept saying, "I gave her everything. What more could she want?" And that was precisely the problem. He gave her everything. There was nothing left to discover, nothing left to chase, nothing left that required her to stretch herself to reach him. The man she left him for wasn't better. He wasn't more attractive, more successful, more interesting. But he had one thing my client didn't. He had a life that existed independently of her. His attention, when he gave it, felt rare. It felt earned. It felt like it mattered because it wasn't guaranteed. This is the mechanism most men don't see until it's too late. Modern dating culture, shaped by apps, by social media, by the gamification of attention, has turned desire itself into a kind of simulation. Women are presented with an endless scroll of faces, an infinite menu of options, all competing for her attention. In that environment, the man who makes himself too available, too eager, too easy to secure is instantly devalued. Not because she's shallow, but because the context has trained her to believe that anything easily obtained must not be worth much. Baudrillard called this the procession of simulacra. The copy becomes more real than the original. The image more powerful than the thing itself. In modern dating, the image of a high-value man, confident, busy, slightly unavailable, outcome-independent, is more attractive than an actually decent man who violates those signs by being too present, too invested, too transparent. Let me show you how this collapse happens in stages, because it's not a single moment, it's a slow erosion, like water wearing down stone. Phase 1 is numbness and denial. The man notices small things. She's less enthusiastic when they talk. She takes longer to respond to texts. She seems distracted when they're together. But he tells himself it's nothing. She's stressed with work. She's dealing with family stuff. It's just a rough week. He's been in relationships before. They all have ups and downs. This is normal. This is what mature adults do. They don't panic at the first sign of friction. So he stays the course. He keeps showing up. He keeps being consistent. He doesn't want to be that guy who gets insecure and needy. He wants to be understanding. He wants to give her space. Phase 2 is justification and self-negotiation. Now the signs are harder to ignore. She cancels plans with vague excuses. She's active on social media but doesn't respond to his messages. When they are together, she's physically present but emotionally distant. She checks her phone. She seems relieved when the date ends. He can feel the attraction dying, but he can't accept it. So he starts building narratives to explain it. Maybe she's scared of intimacy. Perhaps she's been hurt before and she's protecting herself. Maybe if he just gives her more time, more patience, more reassurance, she'll come around. He starts changing his behavior to match what he thinks she needs. He becomes more accommodating, more flexible, more willing to ignore his own boundaries. He stops bringing up things that bother him because he doesn't want to add to her stress. He apologizes more. He explains himself more. He starts every difficult conversation with a preemptive softening. I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but he's negotiating with himself, convincing himself that if he just loves her better, if he just understands her more deeply, if he just proves that he's not like other men, she'll see his value. Phase 3 is self-abandonment and the complete loss of respect. By now, the relationship exists in name only. She's cold. She's irritable. She picks fights over nothing. She criticizes him in ways that feel personal and cutting. She compares him to other men, sometimes explicitly, sometimes through subtle remarks about what she finds attractive. Sex, if it happens at all, is obligatory, mechanical, something she endures rather than desires. And yet, he stays. He stays because he's invested so much. He stays because he doesn't want to be the kind of man who gives up when things get hard. He stays because some part of him still believes that if he can just crack the code, if he can just figure out what she needs, she'll become the woman she was in the beginning. But she won because the woman in the beginning was responding to a man who hadn't yet revealed his whole hand, who hadn't yet made her the center of his universe, who hadn't yet sacrificed his mission on the altar of her approval. What he doesn't understand is that every time he tolerates disrespect, every time he swallows his frustration and pretends everything's fine, every time he rearranges his life to accommodate her whims, He's teaching her exactly how to treat him. Baudrillard wrote about the obscenity of the visible, the way that total transparency kills symbolic power. When you expose everything, when you hold nothing in reserve, when you make your desperation to keep her visible in every interaction, you've lost the game. She can't respect you because respect requires mystery, requires the sense that there's something in you she can't fully control or predict, and you've given her a complete map of your interior. There are no more surprises, no more challenges, no more reasons to chase. Now let's zoom out from the individual man to the system he operates within, because his confusion isn't a personal failure, it's structural. Modern dating exists in an environment Baudrillard would recognize instantly. A hyperreality where images and simulations have replaced authentic interaction, where the mechanisms of seduction have been industrialized and commodified, where the very concepts of masculinity and femininity have been abstracted into competing sets of political signals rather than lived realities. Dating apps have turned human connection into a swipe-based economy where men drastically outnumber women in terms of active engagement, where the top percentile of men receive the vast majority of interest, and where male attention has been so inflated in supply that it's become essentially worthless. The average woman on these platforms is drowning in options, receiving hundreds of likes and messages she'll never even see. In that context, standing out requires either extraordinary physical attractiveness or the ability to signal status, resources, or social proof in a single image. The nice guy who wants to be chosen for his character, his consistency, his emotional depth, he's invisible. The platform isn't designed to reward those qualities. It's designed to optimize for immediate visual impact and the dopamine hit of endless novelty. Social media has created a parallel problem: the constant broadcast of curated perfection, the influencer economy, the way women are presented with an infinite stream of men who appear more attractive, more successful, more interesting than whoever they're currently with. This isn't just vanity, it's a systemic distortion of perception. Baudrillard called it the death of the real. When images become more powerful than reality, when the simulation is more compelling than the lived experience, people stop engaging with what's in front of them and start comparing it to an impossible standard that exists only in edited photos and highlight reels. The man who makes himself fully available to her, who shows her all his flaws and vulnerabilities, who exists in 3 dimensions with bad breath and anxiety and days when he's not particularly interesting, he can't compete with the simulation. He can't compete with the carefully crafted images of men who seem to have it all together, who are always traveling, always surrounded by beautiful people, always winning. But here's the trap. Even if a man tries to compete on those terms, even if he gets the physique, the money, the Instagram aesthetic, he's still playing a losing game, because the moment he uses those things to attract her, the moment he builds his value on external signals rather than an internal frame, he's entered a system where he'll always be one swipe away from replacement. Baudrillard understood this paradox. The more you try to win in the game of simulation, the more you confirm that you're just another image, another commodity, another disposable option in an endless marketplace. Then there's the cultural dimension. Modern men are navigating a landscape in which masculine initiative is both demanded and punished. Women want men to approach, to lead, to take charge, but only in ways that perfectly calibrate to her boundaries, her comfort, her ever-shifting definition of what feels safe versus what feels threatening. The margin for error is microscopic. Too passive and you're boring, sexless, just another nice guy. Too assertive and you're aggressive, creepy, potentially dangerous. And the rules change depending on context, on her mood, on how attracted she is to you, on factors you can't see or control. No playbook works consistently because the game itself is designed to be unwinnable. Add to this the legal and social risks, false accusations, Me Too era paranoia, HR departments that treat any male sexual interest in the workplace as potential harassment, divorce laws that financially devastate men, custody battles that default to maternal preference, and a family court system that treats men as wallets rather than parents. A rational man, looking at this landscape, might reasonably conclude that the risks of deep emotional and legal investment in a woman far outweigh the benefits, and many men are reaching exactly that conclusion. They're not withdrawing because they hate women. They're withdrawing because the system has made it irrational to participate. Baudrillard would say, this is the revenge of the real. The simulation eventually collapses under its own weight, and what's left is a desert, a wasteland where genuine connection becomes nearly impossible because everyone is too busy managing their image, protecting their interests, optimizing for their own advantage. In such a world, The man who tries to play by the old rules, courtship, commitment, building a life together, looks like a fool. And often, he is treated like one. But here's what most men miss. The cost of staying blind to this dynamic isn't just romantic failure. It's the slow erosion of self-respect, the gradual surrender of mission and purpose, the transformation of a man into something he doesn't recognize. When you make a woman the center of your life, when you allow your emotional state to be dictated by her responses, when you sacrifice your goals and friendships and discipline just to keep her comfortable, you're not building a relationship, you're building a prison. And she's not your warden. You are. The man who loses himself in pursuit of female approval doesn't just lose the woman, he loses his ability to do anything meaningful. His work suffers because he can't focus. His friendships atrophy because he's constantly checking his phone. Always half present, always waiting for her signal to determine whether he's allowed to feel good. His body deteriorates because the gym stops being a priority. Late-night arguments and anxious rumination keep him awake. His finances take a hit because he's spending money to impress her, to keep up appearances, to avoid the discomfort of seeming cheap or insufficient. And underneath it all, there's a growing emptiness, a sense that he's become a stranger in his own life, playing a role in someone else's story, rather than authoring his own. Baudrillard wrote that seduction is always a matter of reversibility, of being able to withdraw, of maintaining the power to disappear. The moment you lose that power, the moment you've committed so fully that leaving would destroy you, you've lost the game. And women can smell that loss from a mile away. It's not conscious, it's not deliberate, but they feel it in the way you hold yourself, in the way you respond to their tests, in the way you can't quite meet their eyes anymore, because some part of you is always apologizing for existing. If a system demands your vulnerability but offers no protection, walking away isn't cowardice, it's wisdom. And the tragedy of modern men is that most of them don't realize they have the option to walk until they've already given up everything that made walking possible. They've tied their identity so completely to being a good boyfriend, a good husband, a good provider that they can't imagine who they'd be without that role. And so they stay in situations that destroy them, slowly, quietly, until one day they look in the mirror and don't see the man looking back. So how does a man who understands Baudrillard's lens actually move through the world differently? How does he protect his frame without becoming cold, without shutting down, without turning into the kind of bitter, resentful man who treats every interaction as a power game? First, notice when you're editing yourself to manage your reaction. This is the earliest and most reliable signal that you've started to lose your center. The moment you catch yourself choosing words, not because they're true, but because they'll avoid conflict, not because they represent your actual position, but because they'll keep her calm or happy or engaged. That's the moment you've prioritized her frame over yours. A man who holds his ground doesn't mean a man who's rigid or unwilling to compromise. It means a man who states his truth clearly, without apology, without preemptive softening, and then allows her to respond however she responds. If she gets upset, you don't rush to fix it. You let her feel what she feels. If she pulls away, you don't chase. You hold your position and see if she comes back. Most men think this is cruel. It's not. It's the only way to establish whether you're dealing with a woman who respects boundaries or one who's testing to see how easily you'll abandon yours. Second, stop pretending her emotional states are your responsibility to manage. Women are not children. They're not fragile. They're not going to break because you didn't perfectly attune to their every mood. When she's upset, the reflex for most men is to try to solve it, to fix it, to make it better. This reflex comes from a good place, but it's deeply counterproductive. When you rush to soothe her every time she's uncomfortable, you're implicitly communicating that you don't believe she's capable of handling her own emotions. You're treating her like a problem to be managed, rather than an adult who's responsible for her own internal state. Baudrillard would say you're collapsing the distance required for desire to function. Instead, when she's upset, you can acknowledge it without absorbing it. I can see you're frustrated. Let me know if there's something I can actually help with. And then you go back to your life. You don't hover. You don't keep checking if she's okay. You trust that she'll figure it out, and if she needs something from you, she's capable of asking. Third, refuse to negotiate your mission for access to her. This is the big one, and it's where most men fail. Your mission, your purpose, your work, your physical discipline, your creative projects, whatever it is that gives your life meaning outside of a romantic relationship, that is non-negotiable. It's not something you do when she's busy. It's not something you squeeze in around her schedule. It's the center, and she orbits around it. not the other way around. When she wants you to cancel your gym session to hang out, you politely decline. When she needs you to be available during the hours you've set aside for your work, you tell her that time isn't available. When she suggests a weekend trip that conflicts with a commitment you've made to yourself, you offer an alternative, or you let the trip not happen. This feels selfish to men who've been trained to prioritize relationship harmony above all else. But here's what they don't understand. A woman doesn't want a man who's willing to sacrifice his mission for her. She wants a man whose mission is so compelling that she has to fight for space in it. She wants to feel like she's earned access to a life that would continue fully formed and purposeful, with or without her. Fourth, allow her to experience the consequences of her behavior without rescuing her from discomfort. If she cancels plans last minute, you don't say, "No problem, let's reschedule." You say, "All right, I'm going to make other plans then. Let me know if you want to set something up next week." And then you actually make other plans. If she's rude or dismissive, you don't ignore it or make excuses for her. You name it calmly, without anger. "I don't talk to you that way, and I don't accept being talked to that way. If something's bothering you, we can discuss it like adults, but I'm not interested in games." And if she escalates, you remove yourself from the situation. You don't argue, you don't defend, you don't try to win, you just leave. Baudrillard understood that withdrawal is the ultimate power move in systems of seduction. The man who can walk away without his world collapsing is the man who holds all the cards. Fifth, begin to move as if you're conducting an audition, not begging for a job. Most men approach dating from a position of scarcity. They feel lucky to have a woman's attention, grateful for her time, anxious about doing anything that might make her leave. This frame is poisoned. It guarantees failure. Instead, you need to internalize the reality that you're evaluating her just as much as she's evaluating you. You're not trying to convince her to choose you. You're trying to determine if she meets your standards, if she's capable of adding value to your life, if she has the character and emotional stability to be worth your investment. This isn't arrogance, it's basic self-respect. And the paradox is that the moment you start operating from this frame, the moment you stop chasing and start evaluating, her attraction increases because you've reestablished the distance, the mystery, the sense that access to you is something rare and valuable, not something she can take for granted. Look, the practical behaviors matter, but they're downstream of the real shift, which is internal. The question isn't, how do I act differently? The question is, who am I when no one's watching? If your sense of worth is tied to female approval, if your mood rises and falls based on whether she texts back, if your decisions are shaped primarily by what you think will keep her interested, then no amount of tactical behavior change will save you. You're building on sand. The work is to rebuild your life in such a way that a woman, any woman, is an addition to something already complete, not the missing piece that makes you whole. Now let's look at the two paths that fork from this moment, because you're standing at a threshold, whether you realize it or not. One path is familiar, comfortable, and quietly catastrophic. The other is harder, lonelier at first, but the only one that preserves what's left of your dignity. If you ignore this, if you continue operating from the frame that romantic love is the highest purpose, that female approval is the mark of masculine success, that vulnerability without boundaries is strength. Here's what your life looks like in 5 years. You're in a relationship maybe, but it doesn't feel like a partnership. It feels like hostage negotiation. She's comfortable, but not attracted. She loves you maybe in the way you love a pet or a familiar piece of furniture, but she doesn't desire you. The sex is stopped, or it's so infrequent and perfunctory that it feels like a favor she's granting rather than something she wants. You've gained weight because the gym became negotiable. Your career is stalled because you stopped taking risks, stopped pushing, and stopped believing you deserved more. Your friendships have atrophied to nothing because you bailed on your guys too many times, made too many excuses, and prioritized her too often. And the worst part isn't that you're unhappy. The worst part is that you've forgotten what happiness felt like. You've normalized the numbness. You've convinced yourself that this is just what adult life is, that everyone feels this way, that the problem is you for expecting more. And then one day, without warning, she leaves. Or she cheats, or she just becomes so cold, so distant that you finally can't pretend anymore. And you're left standing in the wreckage of a life you don't recognize, wondering how you got here, wondering where the man you used to be disappeared to, wondering if it's too late to get him back. But there's another path. If you take this moment as initiation, If you use this knowledge not as a weapon against women, but as a mirror to see yourself more clearly, if you commit to rebuilding your life around a mission rather than approval, here's what's possible. In 5 years, you're alone more often, but you're not lonely. You built something that matters to you, a business, a body of work, a physical presence that commands respect. You've reconnected with the friends you abandoned, rebuilt those bonds on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation. You've set boundaries in every area of your life, and you've discovered that the people worth keeping around are the ones who respect those boundaries without you having to defend them. You date, maybe, but from a position of abundance rather than scarcity. Women come into your life, and some of them stay, and some of them leave. And you're fundamentally unbothered either way because your sense of worth isn't tied to their presence. The attraction you generate is different now. It's not the anxious, performance-based approval-seeking of your younger self. It's quieter, more solid, rooted in the fact that you've become a man who doesn't need anyone to complete him. You sleep better. You work with more focus. You move through the world with a calm that other people notice and comment on. You're not trying to win anymore. You're not trying to prove anything. You've simply become the kind of man who holds his own center regardless of what's happening around him. And that quality, that groundedness, that self-possession, that refusal to be shaken by external validation or rejection is the one thing that actually inspires genuine respect and desire, not the simulation of it, the real thing. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The second path is harder. It requires you to sit with discomfort, to let relationships end that need to end, to risk being alone, to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. It requires discipline when you don't feel like being disciplined. It requires you to hold boundaries when holding them makes you the bad guy. It requires you to choose your mission over her mood, your long-term vision over her short-term comfort, your self-respect over her approval. Most men can't do it. Most men would rather stay comfortable, would rather keep the peace, would rather preserve the illusion of connection than face the reality that they've been living someone else's life. But if you're still reading this, you're not most men. Something in you recognized the pattern. Something in you felt the truth of what Baudrillard saw. That desire requires distance. That availability without resistance is worthless. That the man who makes himself too easy to decode ceases to be interesting. You felt it because you've lived it. You've been that man who gave everything and watched her attraction die. You've been the man who tried to love harder, communicate better, and be more vulnerable, only to find that every step closer pushed her further away, and you tired of pretending you don't know why. So here's the thesis one more time. Stripped of all decoration, the moment your desire for her becomes the center of your life, you lose the qualities that made you desirable. Not because women are cruel or shallow, but because attraction operates on principles that have nothing to do with fairness or morality. She doesn't want your devotion. She wants your attention to feel rare, earned, and conditional on her meeting your standards. She doesn't want you to sacrifice your mission for her. She wants to feel like she's been granted access to something that would exist, powerful and complete, without her. And she doesn't want your vulnerability without your strength. She wants to know that you can hold her chaos without being shaken by it, that you have a center she can't knock off balance, no matter how hard she tests it. And here's the mirror line you need to hear. She doesn't kill your purpose. She reflects its absence. If a woman can derail your entire life with a few cold texts, if her mood determines whether you feel like a man or a boy, if her approval is the only currency you value, the problem isn't her power, it's your emptiness. Baudrillard knew this. Seduction only works on those who are already hollow, who are already simulations of themselves rather than the real thing. The man who is actually grounded, actually on mission, actually holding his own frame. That man is fundamentally unseducible in the destructive sense. Women can enter his life, but they can't consume it. They can leave, but they can't destroy it, because life was never about them in the first place. If this hits something in you, if it named a pattern you've been living but couldn't articulate, then share it with the men in your life who need to hear it. Subscribe and keep this work alive for the ones still trapped in the cycle, still making themselves smaller, still wondering why trying harder keeps making things worse. This isn't about hating women. This isn't about games or manipulation. This is about reclaiming the part of yourself you've been negotiating away in exchange for approval that was never yours to earn. A man who trades his mission for her comfort will lose both.